Hey, I'm Emma Garlett and welcome to Pay to Blak. On today's episode, I have Alexander Wolf here with me in the studio. So thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So tell me a bit about you and what you do.
I'm Alexander Wolf. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the National Indigenous Times, a publication that goes through Indigenous affairs. We write topics from, Indigenous fashion to, deaths in custody, domestic abuse. What I do at the company, I just make sure, from partnerships with advertisers, social media, editorial, I just make sure, it's all flowing well and just operating in a good way.
How long have you been doing that for?
Last year, I was involved with the company just on the outside. I was working for my father's contracting company up north for about 4 years after graduating high school. So, I really got a sense of, speaking to Indigenous people, especially up on mine sites, and, learning that whole side of, the way they deal with, like in all those big mining companies deal with, things from heritage to, business partnerships with Indigenous contractors. So I really got a light to that life. And then, obviously, while I was doing that, I was, obviously keeping really up to speed with NIT, advising some things, considering my father is the vice chairman of NIT as well, along with Wayne Bergman. And, I was advising on some things. And then I stopped that in about March of this year. And from there on, I've been, involved full-time with NIT.
So for those people watching that don't know what the National Indigenous Times are, can you explain what you do and what the organisation does?
Oh, of course. So the National Indigenous Times is an Indigenous-owned media company. Like I said before, we cover a variety of topics, politics, sport, fashion, which is our lifestyle style-up division, and, just stories on Indigenous happenings throughout the country. It's we're printed obviously, in the West Australian in partnership with them, with Seven. We're in all big News Corp papers throughout the country as well, as an insert, of course. So that's printed at the end of every month. So when you think about it, we are the most circulated Indigenous newspaper company in the country, essentially. So we cover all topics concerning Indigenous affairs.
And why is it important that you're doing the work that you're doing?
I grew up around a lot of strong Indigenous people. Like, they were, whether they were business owners or, leaders of their community or, matriarchs or patriarchs of their family. I grew up around a lot of strong Indigenous men and women who were champions of within their areas. And I think, it means a lot to me working at NIT because I grew up not seeing these people not get credited for the work they did, especially within their communities or, giving jobs to their mob. And it just, working for NIT, I think it's able to do that for a lot of the mob. I think it does give them light. It does shine light on these people, and it does highlight the work they do, whether it's, contracting, or, getting jobs for their communities or, sport. It's good to see that sort of recognition. I think that's what I take pride in the most.
You mentioned that you grew up around lots of Aboriginal leaders. Do you mind saying who they were?
Firstly, my mother. She was an actress, Ningali Lawford-Wolf. She starred in movies like, Bran Nue Dae, Rabbit-Proof Fence, Last Cab to Darwin. She was an array of theatre throughout her career. She was very big to me because I think that's where I feel like I got my, first exposure to, the wild, because she surrounded me with, a lot of popular Indigenous people and, actors, musicians, Jessica Mauboy, Deborah Mailman, these people we grew up with as kids watching them on the screen. And, footballers like Des Headland is a good family friend of mine. He's a bit of a mentor of mine.
With your mum's background, were you ever interested in acting?
No, I don't think I ever was. I'll leave the dramatic side to my sister and all that sort of stuff. But no, I was never interested in it. But it was incredibly interesting to observe it growing up. And she was very artistic, and she had like a real larger than life sort of glow about her. And I think it was really important to see that growing up as a young Indigenous kid. And it was very special because, like I mentioned before, she surrounded me with like a lot of very artistic people and special people, and it just made my upbringing so much more colourful in a way where I wasn't, focused on one thing. I was able to be like, wow, well, I know this and this is happening. We'd go over to Sydney for some of her plays and go into the Sydney Opera House. It was incredible, but it was very special, and it was a special childhood for me and my siblings, having a person like that. It was just had like a bravado about them. It was incredible. And she's a big inspiration to me. Yeah.
And this is your first interview ever in front of a camera.
Yeah, it is. It is my first interview. Hopefully many more.
Exactly. You never know. This will be the first of so many, I'm sure.
Yeah,
it's only the start of your career, and look where you already are now.
Yeah. No, it's I'm in a very privileged position to, be the CEO of NIT at such a young age. And, I credit that to all the people I've been surrounded around. Apart from my mother, my father is a very, very big inspiration to me. He's worked for, Indigenous corporations almost all his life. And, as long as I can remember, he's always, helped out the mob and everything else. He's always put them first. And right now he's the CEO of an Aboriginal corporation up in Fitzroy, and he's just doing a terrific job. But, all my life he's been the standard for me. Work ethic, pride, and just determination. He's been they've got, like my mother and my father, they're such a big part of, what I've got to say and, how I do it. And they just had, a very big presence. He's always just been a driving force for me. And his work ethic is something I want to match up to.
You tell me a bit about you and what's important to you.
What's important to me, I think, apart from NIT and, Indigenous affairs and all that sort of stuff, I think the most important thing to me is, family. Being Indigenous, you grow up with a strong sense of family. And, I'm very close with my siblings. I'm very close with my father, my stepmother, all the things that mean the world to me because, those people have been so supportive my entire career and, my entire, like, growing up as a teenager, you're not really sure what you want to do and everything else. So I think it's having siblings and family just made navigation a bit easier. But, what's important to me is just making sure I'm surrounded by my loved ones and, keeping in contact with my loved ones and having a strong sense of community to home.
Where is your family from?
So my father, his side of the family are from Tasmania. So he's a Palawa. And my mother, she's from Fitzroy Crossing. So, Walmajeri, all that. And I grew up in Fitzroy Crossing, as a kid. And, we sort of bounced around from Perth, Port Edlin, Fitzroy, all that sort of stuff. But, never been back to Tasmania that much. But spent a lot of time in my youth in Fitzroy Crossing in a community about 4 hours north of Fitzroy called Gubdia, which is the station that was owned by my family. And, I spent a lot of time out there as a child, and that sort of is the root of, family and community, where you said before, it's such a big part of my life growing up, especially, with cousins and, aunties and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers. I think that's, where a strong sense of family and belonging especially comes from, growing up with all those and, being on country and, spending a lot of time with that. And, you surround yourself with certain things such as, art and, being out there with that in the red dirt, especially. It's such a special feeling. And I think you wouldn't get it. It's singular. It is such a singular feeling, and you don't really get that anywhere else in the world, no matter where you are.
So you mentioned growing up with a huge support network, and that's a real privilege because not a lot of Aboriginal people have that, particularly if they're young and from regions or even in Perth. When I grew up, it was very hard. Like, we grew up in Spalding, in Geraldton, in this little town. My family, super poor, had nothing. And so you come from a place where you have, you say you grew up around people that had the stardom, and like you said, your mum had so much Bravo and things like that. So I know there's lots of other kids out there that grew up that didn't have those role models. They didn't have leaders to look up to. And now you're a young leader and you can do so much. So do you have any advice for young kids out there that, don't have those connections or networks on, any advice for them?
When you're young, you're always open to influence as well, whether it's good or bad in a way. So I think my advice is, look to those older than you, even if you don't have anyone to grab guidance off. If there is someone that you are inspired by, whether it be an athlete, a businessman, or, a politician, something like that, if just, I think, almost observe that and, stick to that sort of dream you want. I've failed like that many times, and I think the thing that I pride myself in is like not quitting. I think that's the other advice I'd give. Just even if the path does look rough, and if it sometimes feels like unreachable, just keep going and just try to build a network of your own, surrounding yourself with loved ones as well, even if it's family, or sometimes it's not even family, it could be friends, because that in itself is a motivational factor in a way, and it does build like a lot of character to be around people, who not only support you and love you, it's like they believe in the dream you've got as well. I remember being a young kid, and obviously I've had many people to look up to in my life, but as a young kid you look up to people in sport as well. And I think one person I looked up to was Buddy Franklin. Just seeing the stuff he did and how unreachable that was when he was young, I think it provided me with like a sense of comfort, being like, oh, you know what, like even though this does seem far away, it's not impossible. And I think that's one thing that Indigenous youth have to sort of remember the most. Like, it is not impossible. It is definitely possible. And yeah, like some people start a bit behind the starting line, but the journey is a special one. And I think as long as you remember that, that's what counts the most.
Could they reach out to you?
They for sure could reach out to me. Definitely, especially if it's, I've never taken a protege under my wing, but I'd love to do something like that one day, considering I'm under the wing of a lot of experienced people. Wayne Bergman's another one, who is also the chairman of National Indigenous Times, is someone I look up to very much so. And, he's taken me under his wing, and, he's taught me a lot. And I think, like I said, I've had a lot of privilege growing up with people like that, and like experienced people.
Yeah, because you're 21, but it's not that young. There's people that are like 16, 17 out there, super young. They like need role models, and you'd be a role model to them.
I hope so.
So in the future, for you, what would be your ultimate job or career? Like, where do you want to end up?
I'd love to continue working at NIT forever, because I think it's just got such a big story to tell, and I don't think it's anywhere near finished. It'll forever go on, and I hope one day I can be at the helm of that completely, whether that be as an owner, through maybe managing director, chairman one day. That is ultimately what I'm, but I would love to sit on the board of a charity one day, education, a non-for-profit, something that continues to help out Indigenous people, because I feel like that's, it's always been such a big part of my life, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I'd continue to want to do that, and I just think, I'd love to do work for a corporation that is doing the right thing, and it's doing something noble as well. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just, as long as there is a sense of nobility there, I'll run with that for the rest of my life.
In your role, it's a pretty big role. It's as Chief Operating Officer. And could you explain what a day would look like in your life?
Yeah, no, of course. So, I wake up every morning, and I'm first thing is checking on the National Indigenous Times website to see what story is being published, and I get to the office, you know, I have a chat with the team about what's going on for the week and what's going on for the day. You know, I like to keep my hands out of, you know, the journalistic side of things because I don't want to get too involved with that. But day-to-day operations, you know, just checking in with all the partners as well that advertise within our paper. Just making sure I've got a good rapport with them is very important, just to, you know, to make sure that relationship is sustained.
And you've published on domestic violence with Aboriginal women. You've published on deaths in custody, children in out-of-home care, a lot of really big social issues. Why is that important for you to publish?
Because I think it just tells, you know, I think it tells the brutal truth, which I think is very important for Indigenous politics these days and, you know, Indigenous affairs, because in my eyes, I still think, you know, it's not paid enough attention to. It's really swept under the rug in some cases. So it's important to me because I just think it's not focused on enough, and it is happening a lot. Like whether that be deaths in custody, you know, domestic abuse, all that sort of stuff. It's these are things happening in real time to people who are who care about their community and care about their mob. And, you know, even with deaths in custody, it's happening to the youth a lot. And it is just so heartbreaking to see. And, like, you know, when we publish that, I get a bit of pride because we are pushing the narrative that this needs to be paid attention more from the government, from all, you know, sides of that. But I just think it needs to be kept a close eye on, because it's a situation that needs to be just taken care of a bit more. And, you know, you got politicians out there who are saying the exact same thing. And we've even been, you know, credited as a source from some of those politicians with covering these stories and covering about the topics you've talked about, yeah.
And that's quite powerful if politicians are crediting the stories you're writing, because you know it's getting heard. Have there been any stories that you're particularly very proud of, where you've had results from stories you've published?
Yeah, you know, one I was really particularly proud of, and something that, you know, I think the stories that I'm proud of are probably a bit of a hard truth as well. I remember one story that we did, which, you know, was it was very hard for me to watch and very hard for the story to be published, but it was the story in Broome about the kids who were zip-tied their hands together. You know, that was heartbreaking to watch and see and read about why that happened and how that went on. But I think for me, I was proud because it shed light on the fact that these things are still happening. Like, it's horrific. It is extremely horrific. And when you see it happen to children like that, it raises bigger questions in your mind about, you know, if it's not on a thank God this type of stuff is being captured, because who knows if it's not.
And there was one of a young boy that experienced racism at football as well, and that ended up having a really good result.
Yeah, it did. No, for sure. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw, but, you know, the AFL got him out there, and he was able to walk onto the field with the team. I think the Sydney Swans, I think it was. But, you know, that was, even if it does start in that heartbreaking manner where you feel so sorry for that person, and it is that hard truth again, like I said, it's it is good to see beautiful things like that come out the other side, because it does go to show there is a certain level of care being taken to these situations where, you know, people are like, I can't believe this is still happening. And sometimes those people who are subject to that come out the other side, like, smiling and happy, which brings a lot of pride for myself. And I know everyone at NIT, it brings a lot of pride for them as well.
And so you're a young leader. You're 21 years old. What does the future have in store for you?
I think it's just, you know, making sure NIT stays relevant. That's what's in store for me, making sure we've got more of a platform. You know, not only do we have, you know, serious, gritty topics like NIT, we've also got the Indigenous Business Review, which is coming out next month, which focuses on, you know, Indigenous companies and Indigenous profile. I'd like to just, for me next, I think it's about elevating those and giving a voice to, you know, Indigenous business owners who don't have a voice. And I think, yeah, for me next, I think it's just making sure those things are elevated NIT has a bit of a standing within 21st age media, and just making sure, it continues to flourish. My job is to make sure it's heard, make sure it flourishes, make sure, it's looked after. And as COO, I want to just put as much care into that as I possibly can.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Paint It Black. It's been an absolute delight to have you. And thank you to all of our viewers for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you never miss an episode.